Hello, and welcome to Metachemistry. This is episode 86, and today we're doing a kind of first look at the newest sectorial in Infinity, which is the Torchlight Brigade. So, as of recording, we've just finished up with Torchlight Brigade week. We've seen the new profiles, we've seen the availability charts, we've seen the Fireteam charts, and have overall a fairly strong idea of what's available to them. Again, some things may end up changing a little bit. We don't know how many fire teams they'll have. I kind of have a suspicion there'll be a double fire team sectoral, but we'll see. And again, some things are subject to change. So we might see some little tweaks, but we should generally be in a place where we can at least speak to the topic. But before we actually get started in this new sectoral, we want to give a quick shout to Mo Games, our sponsor of Metachemistry. You can find them at mo-games.com for all your Infinity needs. And if you are a patron of Metachemistry of any level, you get a 10% discount code at their store. And in addition, we raffle off a $40 coupon code every month for anyone that's a member of the Discord, whether they're a patron or not. So you can use that to get some sweet new Torchlight minis, maybe. Because what's better than games? Mo Games. And for this episode, I have Ian and a special guest, one of our local war corps with us, Trevor.
Hey, how's it going?
Things are good. Things are good. So, Trevor, you very recently took up a war corps mantle in the area, as I understand it. And I think that you're also helping coordinate some of the efforts for the Krug this year, right?
Yeah, just got kind of thrown into that with Mark and Eric and Brady this year, so that's kind of exciting.
Yeah, there's some big news for the Krug this year, which I'm sure they're happy to have an extra pair of hands to help with.
Yeah, it's a little inconvenient because this year we're also getting married, so 2 parties to plan this year is kind of a big ask. But yes, it's very exciting. It's kind of a cool first Krug.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So it sounds like you're going into event planning.
Yeah, that's all my 2024 is.
Right. So, yeah, why don't you... I know that there are still some things rather up in the air at the moment because there's still details that haven't been shaken out. But can you tell us a little bit about what's going on with the Colorado Krug this year? What makes it special, and what details do we currently have that we can give everyone?
So this was kind of a brand, kind of a quick moving thing with Interplanetario not happening this year. So the Krug is happening August 23rd through the 25th, which is a Friday. It's going to be a Friday, Saturday tournament this year, but it is kicking off the Infinity Global Community Week. So, which is kind of cool. Bostro will be there, which is kind of special. He hasn't been to Colorado in a while. Yeah.
It's been a bit. Yeah.
We're excited for that. We're currently looking for a new venue because I know the one that we had booked is now already full. So we want to have as many people come to this. So, registration's still open. You can find the link on our Facebook page for the Krug or Colorado Krug. And then there's links, believe on the Metachemistry Discord as well.
Yep.
Yeah, and we'll put those in the show notes for this episode as well. Because if you can make it out to the Colorado Krug, we would love to have you. It's always fun getting to meet people from all kinds of different metas, around the country and in some cases around the world even. And yeah, that would be awesome to have you at this extra special Krug this year, since both of us are planning on being there.
Yep.
So yeah,
More than
it'll be a good time.
I mean, and it's really, really special because this is the longest running Infinity tournament. So come on out, make it really big.
Yeah, very exciting.
A really fun celebration.
Yeah.
Definitely. And so I believe when they announced the Infinity Global Week, that's getting kicked off with the Krug, which again, very exciting. And that'll go for a week. until, what is it, the Nova Open?
I believe it's September 1st. So Nova's
September
on
1st.
the 1st.
Okay.
Yeah, so Krug kicks it off. Nova Open closes it. Bostria is coming out to Krug, and Gutierrez going to Nova.
That's right. Yeah,
and it's
exciting
just kind of
stuff.
a cool concept of doing this like big kind of global thing with a bunch of different events in lieu of having Interplanetario.
Yeah, so
And-
big thank you to Mark, Eric, and Brady for, as always, for helping to make the Krug a good time. And Trevor, I'm sure that you will have some great input and provide some extra helping hands for that as well.
A lot of learning, so
Right.
we're excited.
Yeah, definitely. So, for the focal point of our episode tonight, we haven't seen a new sectorial in Infinity for a little bit now.
Mhm.
Let's see, what was the last brand new sectorial? I don't think it was in N4. I think it was in N3 when we had a new sectorial, wasn't it?
Cosmo.
Flood, I believe, yeah.
And that was right
they
at
were-
the start of N4.
Was it actually N4? Okay, I know it was close.
And
but-
Starmada, I think they were just the two.
Starmada,
N4.
I think Starmada was just before N4, and then Cosmo was just at the start of N4. But I could be wrong because it's been a few years now.
Yeah, it's been a little bit, but yeah, exciting stuff. It's good to see some new things to help flesh out O12, give them some more tools and some more options, kind of help catch them up a little bit. Maybe Malif will get a sectoral next when there's a new one. That'd be cool.
Nah, we need another Pano or Ariadne sectorial. 5's not enough.
Oh, that's why. There's a sectoral for every Joe Nanuxia sculpt.
Yes.
Clearly.
Then we can get one for every Kodali sculpt too.
Ooh, yeah, Combine's up there too, isn't it? All right, so let's start in this new sectoral. The focus is generally, it's sort of a primarily heavy infantry focused sectoral. Most of your units' availability are tied up in heavy infantry. They also have some new combat remotes, which are pretty exciting. You can do some cool stuff with them. We'll talk about those. And then a couple specialized medium infantry, and then a few other bits and bobs kind of hanging around. But yeah, so what we'll do to start is we'll go over each of the new profiles in a little bit of depth and just kind of talk about their capabilities and, just kind of give, again, first thoughts on what we have here in the Torchlight Brigade. So I think a fitting place to start is with a fitting place to start is with the Silver Star Rovers. These are the line troops in Torchlight. They're heavy infantry. They're the highest availability unit in the sectorial at 5. And to look at them, they make a pretty direct analog to Zhejiang terracotta soldiers. They're very much that style of troop with a couple interesting differences. But the things that kind of stick out to me, and you guys feel free to give me your thoughts as well here in a moment, is that the 6-2 move is solid. Having 6-2 move is a pretty good place to be. Their BS 13, their Whip 13, which is perfectly fine, especially since they're all specialist operatives, regardless of profile. That's really sweet. And their Armor 3, BTS 6, True 2 wounds. And all of them except for the heavy weapons have a light riot stopper. Otherwise, they've got combi and multi-rifles, an HMG, and a missile launcher, and several TAC-aware profiles, which I think will come up quite a bit. And they can go in core teams. They'll probably be a good backbone trooper to the army, as they're intended, I think. But yeah, what kind of stands out to you guys, kind of at first glance, looking at these profiles?
The BTS 6 is super solid for what's effectively a line trooper.
that's on all the new profiles, the ones that are
Yeah.
Torchlight coming out, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's a really high BTS faction.
Yeah, and just being specialist on everybody is super fantastic. That if you're taking it as a forward observer or a paramedic, you're taking it that because you need it to do a classified, or you want the D charges on the forward observer. Like you're not taking that to be the specialist because it already is. And then just having that flexibility of those TAC awareness profiles, especially because the kind of cheap one is the combi rifle light riot stopper with a firewall tin bot. Like that's just kind of a go-to for a fire team, just for order efficiency, and the fact that it's still a specialist is great. So even in like a mixed Harris, you have that order efficiency. You can get up there, you can do objectives, and not feel like you're having to switch over to somebody else to do it. You can just use the TAC aware order and go and do the objective.
That was my big one that just like jumped out at me, was the fact that like even the firewall, guy is a specialist, which is a weird list building thing when you don't have to worry about, adding some sort of kit. Is pretty nice.
Yeah. The HMG is a specialist, right?
The missile launcher is a specialist.
Yeah, so I think that's really interesting. I think it's pretty notable that as we go through this, there are no firewall -6 mods in the list, and there's no ECM hacking. So they really have to lean into that BTS, but it is a very high trending BTS sectorial.
Yeah.
I think it has the most BTS 9 models of any sectorial in the game.
Wow.
I can see that, yeah.
Because there's at least 3. There's 3 of them for sure, which again we'll talk about those in a little bit. But almost everything starts out at 6 in terms of the new units available to Torchlight.
Well, and then I'm also noticing with the Silver Star Rovers that even though they're only CC 16 and Fizz 12, which isn't great, they all have +1 burst heavy pistols. Yeah,
the heavy pistols is nice. It gives you a good backup weapon and passable in CC against something else that sucks.
Yeah, like it's damage 14, not 12, because I have a heavy pistol, and it gets 2 shots.
Yeah. And it's nice to have something like that for your heavy weapons profiles in particular. Just something that's a little better at covering those short ranges since they lose the riot stoppers.
Yeah.
But yeah, multi-wound units with template weapons of any kind are usually pretty helpful, especially when that template can potentially shut down anything in one failed save.
They're a really interesting line infantry, heavy infantry kind of, or it's just kind of an interesting infantry. I haven't seen anything really like it. So
yeah, I think they'll be pretty cool. And of course, you're going to see these fairly regularly because they kind of need to be there a little bit to make fire teams not strictly necessary. But I feel like you'll see at least 1 or 2 of these in most Torchlight lists. And then we move on to the other kind of core unit to the Rovers are the Hellblazers. And so the Hellblazers are the close combat units. These are, if the Rovers are Zhuyong, then Hellblazers are effectively Tunkos. And they seem pretty great. Like they're very cost efficient. They are impetuous to, which in this case, as in most sectorials, is mostly there to keep the cost down. But they have, a respectable Fizz of 13. They've got CC 22 with martial arts level 2 and an explosive close combat weapon. And then they come with either light shotgun Flammenspeer, submachine gun Blitzen, and a boarding shotgun. Or a boarding shotgun. Notably, they have stealth.
That was
which was a little awkward. And like, wait, what do you mean?
Those swords are too big to have stealth.
Oh, that's right.
No, I've noticed that like it is basically the Silver Star profile. It just inverts the BS and the Fizz stats, and then gives it a better CC. But otherwise, it fits right in line with that game design element that they put in with the Silver Stars.
Yeah, so all the same defensive stats, but it helps you cheapen those teams pretty significantly by shaving a good 10 points off the profiles roughly. And they're respectable in close combat. Like they're not going to beat everything out there, but they'll beat plenty. Like there are better things in CC, but not like a lot of things better in CC.
Yeah, but one goes through and that's 3 saves before crits happen, which damage 14. So
Yep, 14, critting on a 25.
pretty good.
Yeah, so 15 plus if there's
Yep.
no martial arts or natural born warrior involved. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're
Do
not bad.
classifieds well too. I was gonna say for the missions like looting and sabotaging or mind wipe, like having those guys break consoles is really nice too.
Yeah, being explosive is really nice for those missions. Having anti-material and
6-2 move with armor 3 and 2 wounds there's a good chance they're getting there too. And with stealth.
Yep. And again, more multi-wound models that drop templates. 2 or 3 in a fire team.
Yep.
In case there's not something to whack, you can shotgun them. So yeah,
Yes.
Hellblazers, I think you'll see these in most lists for sure. I think that those are going to be a very common pick just because there's a fair chunk of expensive units in the sectoral, and that's one of the ways to kind of bump up your overall order count. So I think those will be a common sight. And then just going down the availability charts, they can take a Kappa and they can take 2 Raven Eyes. This will help them quite a bit in terms of that problem for taking higher order count lists. Because I think that like the Kappa Hacker is a pretty common one if you want to push InfoWar. A 12-point hacker is pretty hard to beat. Raven Eye officers are really solid lieutenants. They give you some defense in the DZ and all that good stuff. So those are nice to have. I do think it's kind of funny that they get more Raven Eye than they do Kappa.
That was a little weird.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the Kappa is kind of a shoe-in for reinforcements purposes. So they have a comlink unit that's not, a rover or something. But in terms of more unique profiles to the faction or new profiles, we have the Wave Riders. And the Wave Riders are exactly what every cyber combat unit coming out these days looks like. They've got, submachine gun, pitcher, BTS-6, hacking device with an upgrade. That's your Jazz, that's your Dartok, that's your, all of that stuff, the Dokaibi. All of those sorts of units are kind of in that similar templating. But the Wave Riders are pretty interesting. They're also fast. These are medium infantry, not heavy. But they have Mimetism 3, which is cool. They have Whip 13, which is perfectly fine. BTS 6, which is pretty nice. And they're 6-2 move. They get extra burst on their Oblivion, on their hacking device profiles, which you can either take the boarding shotgun, Blitzen, or submachine gun pitcher for 28 and 24 points, respectively. Or you can take a killer hacker that gets an extra point of damage on Trinity, bumping that up to 15, I believe. And that's another submachine gun pitcher version. Interestingly, they have an explosive close combat weapon and D-charges. I mean, they're CC 18.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at. That's the strangest thing for a hacker. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for one that doesn't really do anything in CC. Like, CC 18 is like enough that, if I'm really backed into a corner, I'll throw down against a CC 15 dude and hope that it goes well, but I feel like there's usually going to be a better option. Like, I'm probably just going to shoot the thing. But, yeah, kind of strange. But yeah, I think that these will be nice to have. They will fit nicely into Silver Star teams because they count for composition bonuses. It's a way to give yourself a little bit of hacking protection. Just they can extend your... I don't see the boarding shotgun one taken terribly often, honestly, because 1, it's the most expensive, and 2, it doesn't get a pitcher like the SMG versions. And I think that you're going to want that. If you're bringing Wave Riders, you're probably bringing one or two other hackers. And I like that it feels like they can play a decent InfoWar game, but they don't have to spec into that. It's just a playstyle, which I think could be fun for them. But what stands out to you guys about Wave Riders?
Yeah, I think the mimetism -3 being in those like 5-man teams, or those, at least this, the Silver Star teams, is kind of nice to have that little bit more survivability if it doesn't have another wound, to me. So,
Definitely.
Armor 3 is nice on a hacker too. BTS 6.
Yeah. They're actually, for a 1 wound model, they're fairly resilient. Like, that's kind of generally as good as you get on 1 wound, true 1 wound stuff.
Yeah, I think I think they're interesting. I don't know. They feel kind of halfway there, like they should have either a little something else, or just like focus down on something a little harder. Because right now, like the D charges explosive CCW, it just seems like a wasteful a design element, and it just like, it just feels like maybe they need, like I said, either focus the profiles down individually onto something a little harder, or give them like one more kind of special thing to kind of make them stand out. Because right now they're good, but they're just very vanilla.
Yeah, and I think part of that is that they are another unit of the same like cyber warrior template that every cyber warrior regiment kind of falls into. They all look pretty close to this, with a handful of changes. I would have liked to have seen this be a heavy infantry for another like 6 points. Like if this was another like, because it's basically another rover stat line unit, but if you gave it +1 fizz and +1 wound,
or even no wounding cap.
Yeah, I could see that.
Still keeps the points cost down, but it's
so I think that would have been interesting, but not a huge deal.
Like I said, they feel like they're missing just some small element to make them kind of stand out as their own kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that they will be useful, but I don't know if you'll see them all the time. It kind of depends. Like you don't have to go into InfoWar, but if you want to kind of lean that direction, I think you'll definitely have one or even both of these.
Now that said, based on their emblem, I totally expect crossover with Varuna. Just saying, I need to have them in my my Sea Warriors sectorial.
It's definitely the only force in the sphere that involves water.
It is.
It felt like CB I think they felt like they had to be included in the Silver Star, so they feel more combat oriented with that BS-12. They almost look like the Hellblazers, the Hellbringers, to me, stat wise. So, except for
they're close, right? Yeah, except they hack, and they're not definitely not as good in CC. But they're like better than you would expect some backline hacker to be. So yeah, I kind of like them, but I don't think that they're going to show up all the time. Like the Rovers and Hellblazers, I think will make their way into the vast majority of lists. But Wave Riders they're a sometimes. Probably even
BS-12,
more often than not.
BS-12 is great for pitchers too. Just having that little bump up, so appreciate that.
And if you're in and if you do happen to, because they do maintain composition for Silver Stars, so if you throw one of these in with a couple Rovers and Hellblazers or something, landing those on 18s feels pretty good. In good range, of course. So yeah, and then we move on to another medium infantry. We have the Nimrods. The Wetworks division, it's a profile that looks really interesting, but then once you get to the actual loadouts, it feels a lot less so. Like it's cool that it's 6-2 move, BS 13, armor 2, BTS 6, 1 wound. They've got super jump, mimetism 3, multi-spectral visor level 2, terrain total, They're shock immune for the times that comes up. But that sounds exciting. Reading that off, I'm like, oh, that's pretty awesome. And then you look at it, and they only have 2 profiles. They have the FTO version, which you can throw into teams. It doesn't count as anything else for composition purposes, but it's a BS attack shock with an AP marksman rifle and an AP heavy pistol for 31 points, which it does have a lot of stuff on it, but it's not like this is going to be like your main gunfighter for a team. Like even a Harris team, I don't think is going to specifically want this. I think this is something you'd have to kind of force, knowing that you could probably find something better for that slot, but just want to use the sweet model, and it is pretty cool.
It was a good model. Just based on the stats, it looks like they were trying to make it an Epsilon, but different.
A little bit, right? Like it's definitely in that vein, but without the guns and the fire teams to back it up.
Mm-hmm.
So the other option can't join fire teams because it has a marker state. Or no, it doesn't. I'm sorry. It can't join fire teams because it has hidden deployment. It gets surprise attack -3 and forward deployment +8 inches on a submachine gun flash pulse shock mines unit for 29 points.
Hey,
which
it's
is
a
just
skirmisher.
Yeah, like it's basically a skirmisher with MSV2, but
Which is kind of cool.
It is interesting, but the surprise attack goes largely wasted.
Yeah, you get it once.
You're probably and it has to be somewhere you're going to want to use it on your active turn, because you only get that initial 6-inch move to use it, and you're on theoretically the 20-inch line for most missions.
Yeah.
So is something going to be within that what is it? I can count 20, 30. No, I can't. There we go. 34 inches. Aha, I got there. Is something within 34 inches of you, like, or from your side of the board, that you want to
on the
surprise
side that
attack
you
an
wanna,
SMG?
Yeah, I think it's more useful as kind of a turn 2 or turn 3 thing when things have moved already towards the center of the board, and you just need to remove a piece that's going for an objective. I think that's where it becomes useful.
I really wish it was like a hacker or something. Some sort of specialist.
Exactly. Like, not being a specialist kills it for me. Like, this isn't a like, it wants to be a gunfighter, but doesn't have good guns to do it with. And it behaves like a skirmisher specialist, but isn't a specialist. I think the only thing that is of interest about it is that it can be hidden deployment when you have no other hidden deployment in the sectoral.
Mm-hmm.
But how valuable is that on a unit that just wants to try and kill stuff with a submachine gun from a little bit outside your deployment zone? Like, I don't know if I don't know if we'll see much of those, to be honest.
Model's really sweet, though.
The model is really cool. I like the model quite a bit. I wish that had a couple more options too. Like if there was that skirmisher profile or skirmisher-esque profile, like if there was a hidden deployment surprise attack multi-sniper, that would be cool. Or even if it just had that on an FTO version instead, just something to give you have all these skills that you want to leverage to shoot with. But
I mean, honestly, even
rifles, okay.
If getting the hidden deployment surprise attack on the AP shock marksman rifle wouldn't be bad.
Right.
If we're going to lean into like trying to attack stuff.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Just feels like a gunner for that mobility team, that Harris duo option. That's kind of where I just see it fitting into lists.
Yeah, and I don't think it's going to fit. I think it's going to get pushed out by other wildcards more frequently.
Jack boots. That's got a Spitfire. That seems better.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, especially since they only really link with the Cludgers.
Yep. Pretty much. So, speaking of the Cludgers, we have another medium infantry that is also 6'2" move. So much 6'2" in this sectoral, which is great.
It's a lot.
They're Mimetism 3 with BS 13, Whip 14, Arm 2 BTS 6, Like they actually look kind of a lot like the profile-wise. They look a lot like the Nimrods. They have
Mhm.
stealth and terrain total, and this is your like special. This is like your combat doctor engineer. You can take the Lambda, which are your regular kind of line trooper doctor engineer choices, but these are like your combat variants. And they can either be an engineer with a boarding shotgun Panzerfaust D charges, or submachine gun Panzerfaust D charges, or you can take the doctor who's a submachine gun adhesive launcher. And they're in the mid to high 20s. And these can go, excuse me, and these can be in the mobility teams or they can be wild cards, which is pretty notable. I think that being able to slap a doctor or engineer wherever you want is really useful. And so having a non-hackable engineer to remove status effects from your hackable fire team is pretty great. And also that you can duo one of these with the tag, which we'll go into later, the Wrecker. I think that's pretty great. They're a little on the pricey side because they are fairly fragile. But instead of having the line trooper with, a U-bot in the back line, you have someone who's there with your team that you don't have to spend orders running the bot over
Yeah.
to go fix.
Who's faster, with better armor and better BTS
Mm-hmm.
than most other equivalent options.
Mm-hmm.
And is BS 13, so if he does need to throw down or defend himself, he actually stands a better chance than most other engineers.
Yeah, definitely.
They're really good.
Yeah, like pretty solid. Like, you get hit with a template or you don't make it on that face-to-face roll, they're probably done.
And they have stealth.
Sorry.
They're
And they have
sneaky.
stealth. Sorry, someone just coming in.
Yeah, mimetism stealth on a sneaky engineer. He's going to get that objective.
Right. So yeah, I think Kludgers will probably show up pretty frequently as well. Probably like a one-off. Because they add some nice utility to fire teams they can join. So I think that that'll be pretty helpful. And again, they also are kind of combat specialists. Like they can get some work done. Like they don't want to duke it out with other things if they can help it, but BS13 and MIM3 go a long way.
I feel pretty reliable.
Yeah, and Whip 14 is solid. Like that's a nice place to be for sure. Because most of the things that we're seeing are all 13s. But yeah. And then we have the Yellow Jackets, which Yellow Jackets are interesting. They're kind of a mostly bare bones combat jump troop / parachutist, but they're a heavy infantry. Notably, they have stealth, which is really nice on a hackable jump troop.
Only after it comes in, though.
Yes, yeah, you have to be careful to not land near a hacker or repeater, but the freedom of movement you have moving around after that is really nice. And they're pretty inexpensive overall for being a heavy infantry. They don't have any particularly special weapons, which is a little unfortunate. Like I would have liked to have seen a Spitfire on one of these guys, honestly, or even a Red Fury. But you do have either, boarding shotgun and decharges or SMG specialists and decharges. They can either be a specialist operative or a standard hacker. Notably, the hacker doesn't cost SWC in the preview profile, which is kind of something. And then they have
See
a
if that gets changed.
I would not be surprised if it did.
Yeah.
It might stay, but I would not expect it to. And then they can take a Combi Light Riot Stopper, which I think is a good option. They have Mimetism -3, which is great. They're BS 12, which is perfectly good enough for what they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
They get extra dodge distance, which a couple other profiles have had a little bit, but they have a +2 dodge distance here, which is pretty neat. And then they're the shock immune, no wound in cap version of heavy infantry, which kind of helps keep their cost down a little.
Yep.
Yeah. Arm 3 and BTS 6 is pretty reasonable defense and kind of the order of the day for most Torchlight units. And again, another Whip 13 specialist if you take one of the specialist profiles. I know there are people who take 3 or 4 Liu Jing in lists. And if you can do it with Liu Jing, you sure as hell can do it with Yellow Jackets.
Oh yeah. Only 2 though.
Yeah, that's true. They're only availability 2. But you can take multiple of them, I mean, that and still like get some pretty good value out of them. And that's not a wild amount of points, especially for dropping heavy infantry in your opponent's backfield. But
Really
yeah, it's
affordable.
interesting. Yeah, when these are, like looking at similar costs to like the Delta from Vanilla 012 for 1 wound medium infantry. I mean, there are other benefits that the Delta brings, but they're, in that bracket of points. But I think they're a little bit more dedicated in their role, a little bit more, pick off attack targets of opportunity and things like that. But yeah, so I think Yellow Jackets will be pretty cool. I don't think they'll be super common because I think that there is generally sort of an aversion to combat jump troops, and this is a 4/4 troop. I know most of the things we've been looking at have been 6/2, but this is 4/4 without extra maneuverability skills once it's on the board, and so it's a little bit less likely to see as a parachutist. And I know that plenty of players are not terribly comfortable trying to drop in. Notably, it's Fizz 12. So even with controlled jump off an Evo hacker, you're looking at 15s to drop, which is not bad, but they're pricey enough that you don't want it in your DZ with a 4/4 move.
Parachutist.
You could parachutist, but their guns are basically all 8-inch optimal range weapons, except for the combi.
Yep.
Which I do like the combi. I think it's a pretty good option on this profile.
I think Right Stopper's nice on that too.
Exactly. Yeah. You can do some cool stuff with that. And then we have the Silver Star Prime. This one's kind of making some waves for a couple reasons. It is a very good gunfighter. We see the return of BS attack -3, or as it was known in N3, full auto level 2. Basically, if you declare BS attack, your opponent gets -3 on their face-to-face roll, is what that boils down to. This is a big Silhouette 5 heavy infantry, back to 6/2 move again, BS 14, which is pretty notable, Armor 5, BTS 9, which is pretty wild on a non-tag. I mean, it's not the only one, of course, but it's significant. And then it has tactical awareness and courage, MSV1, which is pretty cool. So it gives a mod that you can't stop, and then it also fights through the most common negative modifier. And you can take it with a heavy machine gun that's a +1 damage HMG, and heavy riot stopper, and it can be your lieutenant or not.
Yep.
And they can join fire teams, which is cool. They don't count for composition bonuses, but that feels pretty reasonable, all things considered.
Feels nice
And if they need to throw down in CC, they are hitting it damage 14 with their +1 damage CC attacks.
They do get +1 CC damage.
It has a gigantic sword.
That's the +1, yeah. It's shock on CC 18.
Yep.
That's never.
Or they could heavy pistol you,
Exactly.
which is shock, damage 14.
Yep. It's pointless. Like I don't understand. I'm sure it's to up the cost, which is good because I think that it is aggressively costed at 53 points.
Yes.
1 SWC for the lieutenant, or you pay the full price for a non-lieutenant at 1.5. This thing will put down enemy arrows fairly easily. Like, not all the time, and it might struggle against tags and the like, but
the lack of AP is a little concerning, but honestly, that's fine considering where its points costed at.
Absolutely. And it gives the tag, which we'll talk about later, a job. Otherwise, it would have no job. But,
yeah,
I mean, damage 16, if you're not going to be AP, damage 16 is a pretty good place to be at. And really against most units, like if we're talking about anything that's armor, like 4 or 5 or under, this is perfectly fine. Like this is plenty to get through those type of targets with relative ease.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, the heavy riot stopper is a nice thing to have, O12 doing their usual glue shenanigans. And the heavy pistol working up close if you need that face to face and inflict that -3 again. Pretty good. Yeah, I think that these could do with being a good 3 to 6 points more. I don't think they're busted or anything, but I think that they are a little aggressively costed.
Yep.
I feel like the Ryzen MSV and the BS attack -3 will be interesting, I guess, trying to find, kind of find that balance. I know it's very controversial right now, so see how it plays. Yeah, lots of
The
Kriza
salty tears of the Kriza players.
Yeah. Yeah, and for those not in the know of the joke, Kriza Borax in N3 did have that skill that was effectively what is now BS attack -3. It was changed to mimetism in the N4 crossover, and now that skill has returned, but not for them. Who knows? Maybe it'll change. I would not expect it, though. If you're playing Krizas, don't expect it to change, but be happy if it happens, I guess. And on to the next kind of big guy that we have here. At size 6, we have the Wreckers, which is the tag that you get in Torchlight Brigade. So it's a light tag, but it's on the high end for light tags. It's Arm 6, BTS 9 again, which is pretty notable. It's 6/4 move, which is great. BS 13, which is a little rough for a tag. And full 3 structure, it's remote presence, the usual tag things that it has, which I was not very excited about this tag when I was first looking at it until I saw the BS attack AP. Like, that's where it starts to come into its own. Like, once you see okay, it either has a heavy machine gun, double chain rifle, Spitfire double chain rifle, or heavy rocket launcher, double chain rifle. Well, extra burst on the rocket launcher and the chain rifle. And it's all in the gamut of the 50s. The heavy rocket launcher's at 51, and the HMG is the most expensive at 57. So it's a pretty cheap tag overall. It's a fair investment for a list, but for a tag profile, that's not too bad.
I'm liking the terrain total, though.
Yeah,
the terrain total's nice.
Because of just how much they've been pushing the terrain template zones, which, granted, they've backed off a little bit this season, but how prevalent that has been over the last several seasons, it's nice to see a tag getting terrain total to be able to take advantage or ignore those.
Yeah, and there's a decent amount of terrain total units in these new profiles.
Yeah,
like the Nimrod has terrain total. I believe the Kludgers have terrain total. The new Direfo, which we'll talk about in a little bit, Sonya has it. The Skirmisher HI has it. Samus has it. Like, there's the Wave Riders have it. Yeah, it's kind of all over the place.
Yeah,
which will be pretty notable.
Very thematic.
Yeah, they walk through the new places of any type of terrain. They explore the unknown reaches. But yeah, so the things that kind of strike me here is I think it's interesting that there's a choice between the HMG and the Spitfire. I'm going to almost always want the HMG instead, because usually there's a trade-off, right? For this kind of light tag, it's you get we see this in the Shakush and the Agamemnon. You get a heavy machine gun or an AP Spitfire. Like, all right, well, that's kind of an interesting choice. This is all AP all the time. And also, burst 2, damage 14 AP chain rifles is kind of gross. So that will hurt.
Yeah.
But
There is a trade-off. It's called 2 points.
I guess, yeah, if you just can't fit it, I don't see it. Then the rocket launcher. The heavy rocket launcher is interesting.
Yeah.
I don't think that it is overpowered, but I strongly dislike the combination of armor-piercing continuous damage. I think that those things should not coexist, just from a game design perspective. I don't think it's...
Don't disagree, but it makes me giggle because I want to take this and light all the things on fire because I actually think that is the profile I would use most often.
Yeah, and at 51
Cheapest.
points, like that's serious. Like and it's burst 3 rocket launcher, which is right where you want to be at. Like for an active turn weapon, like going below burst 3 sucks unless you have pretty tremendous mods in your favor. But yeah, like burst 3 is respectable. But yeah, it's like, okay, armor piercing is to deal with armored targets. Continuous damage is to burn away lighter targets. And I just don't think that they should exist on the same unit. I feel the same way about the Azrael. And I think that it should get some other benefit instead in that case. But here we are.
Your AVA-2, I'm taking 2 of them.
Perfect. You do that.
Only played against Devin.
All
Only
the
against me,
fire,
though.
all the time.
Yeah. Look at my armor-piercing fire. Like, oh.
I'm just waiting for an armor-piercing flamethrower for maximum giggles.
Yay. Talk about this anymore. But yeah, I just think design-wise, I think that there's some dissonance there that I don't like.
Yeah.
But you know,
And that
it's
is
in the
that
game.
is very fair.
I think it's going to stay around for a bit. I would like to see some alternatives instead, but we'll see what happens. All right, and then we move on to another heavy infantry in the Striders, and the Striders are kind of the skirmisher heavy infantry. And these are pretty interesting. I like this trooper quite a bit. They're 4/4 they're 4/4 move, as opposed to a lot of the 6/2 that we're seeing elsewhere. CC 16 doesn't really make a huge difference. BS 12, Fizz 11, Whip 13, Arm 3, BTS 6. They have the shock immune no wound in cap package, and they're full camouflage. They have stealth and surprise attack -3. They've got forward deployment 8 inches, MIM 3, NCO on all profiles, and again we see the terrain total and stealth if I didn't mention that. So they've got a pretty good loadout of skills, and I like that they have a gunfighter profile. It's not my favorite one that I think I would go to all the time, but having a Red Fury is pretty cool on this type of unit. It's not terribly common from what I recall. But otherwise, all of them are specialist operatives, including the 2 mine layer profiles, which is pretty notable. That's not something you tend to see a whole lot. You can either take the specialist submachine gun shock mines decharges, or take that with mine layer, or take a mine layer that swaps out shock mines for a deployable repeater. Which
that's the
again
one I'd use.
Yeah, it's a really good way to, if you want to do some info war, like you take a Wave Rider or 2, you can take a Strider, a Kappa Hacker, and you can actually do some pretty decent hacking networks with these.
And they're affordable enough if you took 2 of the Striders and then you're starting with a pair of repeaters up at 20 inches up the board. Like that's a pretty good start for your defensive hacking network.
Yeah, it's
just
not
you
bad at all.
can probably cover a lot of the objectives and make them hard to approach right off the bat.
Yep. And so most of these are in the high 20s. The Red Fury goes up to 34 points, but the rest are all 27 to 29.
Yeah,
which is a pretty nice price point to be. You lose out on some of the advantages of, because the Zensha is kind of the obvious comparison. You lose out on some of the things that it brings, like the climbing plus is really powerful. The full infiltration is really useful, things like that. But generally speaking, I think Striders are going to be great. I think you will commonly see one of these, and it would not be outlandish to see both of them used. I really like the light shotgun, though.
Nice. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, native NCO is great.
Just nice when you need that extra order to push a button or something. And I just like that on this profile a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or drop all the repeaters.
Drop them all.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, the forward observer with extra burst light shotgun, flash pulse mines and decharges, shock mines, is pretty great. That's another standout one to me. Like, I feel like the forward observer and the dep rep profiles are the ones that I like the best, generally speaking. I mean, I feel like the shock mines and the dep rep mine layers are both kind of interchangeable depending on the type of list you want to run or what you're kind of looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But probably the deployable repeaters, because there's another really cool mine layer here that we'll talk about here shortly. They get the Cyclops, so they can take 2 Cyclops, which are pretty all right. They're kind of fun profiles. They can do some interesting stuff, but we won't really go into them just yet. They are wildcards, which is kind of cool. They can be hackers. They can have a multi-marksman rifle, stuff like that. They can take Lambda, so they can have 2 of those, which again are your basic doctor engineer units. Then they have, in the remotes, they bring 2 new specialized remotes to O12, which will be really neat. There's the Moonrakers, which Moonrakers are really interesting. They have forward deployment. They're Silhouette 2, which is worth noting. They're Silhouette 2. They have forward deployment, 8 inches. They have 1-use camouflage with surprise attack, and they carry mimetism -3. And their profile isn't anything wild. They are 4/4 move instead of, the 6/4 you would commonly expect on a remote. They're BS 11, which is fairly typical. Fizz 10 with 12, no armor. BTS 6, though, again, so much BTS in this faction. But they carry a heavy shotgun, adhesive launcher, and shock mines. And there's that one, and then a mine layer version for an extra 1.5 SWC.
And they're cheap.
Yeah, they're really cheap.
So cheap.
Like 15, 16 points is really nice. And just having some extra, because you'll have the shock mine in the midfield, and then you'll also have a camouflaged heavy shotgun, which is just a mine with more ouch. Like,
and in range.
And in range. Yeah, so, and it can either template you, or you can force some good, a decent face-to-face roll if you get around the corner on something at, effective ballistic skill of 17.
So you take these for the mines, and you take the Striders for the repeaters, and then you got the whole midfield just kind of covered.
Or you could take their AVA 2, and so we're Striders. Take all 4 shock mine layers.
yeah, or that.
Yeah, you can have a lot of midfield presence here. It's not infiltration.
Flashbacks to Chasseurs.
Right. But yeah, and I think it's pretty notable that these are cheap enough to help fuel those order counts again. Because a lot of stuff we've been looking at is in the 20s, 30s, and up, barring a couple exceptions. Like, this is another way to kind of reel those costs back in, which will be pretty helpful. And then the other unit they picked up were the Stormbots. And the Stormbots are, profile-wise, they're kind of your typical combat remote. So they're larger Silhouette 4, they're 6/4 move. Notably, they're BS 13. Most of these end up being BS 12. Whip 13, Arm 3, BTS 6, again, 2 structure. And they have BS attack +1 damage and carry a repeater. And then the usual, immunity shock, remote presence, etc. Their weapon loadouts are pretty interesting because looking at that profile, it reminds me very much of a Rudra gunbot from OSS.
Yeah.
I think they're definitely in that vein. But they have the heavy rocket launcher, which you can either take the +1 burst heavy rocket launcher, Pulsar EM mines, which is the non-Fireteam version, Or you can take the Fireteam version, which loses the +1 burst, but then theoretically gains it again when you put it in a Harris. But yeah, Pulsar, EM Mines, Heavy Rocket Launcher, pretty interesting loadout. You can do some cool stuff with that, I think. And also they have a +1 burst combi rifle in Pulsar, which is just a sawed-off Spitfire. Because it's +1 damage, +1 burst.
I kind of love this. And now
Right?
it's in a Fireteam.
Yeah, so you can... And they are wildcards.
Yeah.
So you can do some interesting stuff with them. And being BS13 is a pretty nice spot to start. So you put some support wear on this, like you give it marksmanship or what have you. And all right, here's my 16-inch positive range Spitfire on a BS13 marksmanship platform that's multi-wound. That feels pretty all right for 30 points. Yeah. And then Evo, obviously. But yeah, I think they're pretty cool. Like, they're interesting and different. It's not just a, okay, here's another, heavy machine gun bot or something like that. They have interesting weapons. So I think they're pretty cool. And like, looking at the rocket launcher Fireteam option, that's pretty cheap. Like 25 points for effectively a heavy infantry rocket launcher. It's pretty nice. And then we have the normal remote suite that you would expect. They're basically all kind of they're mostly AVA-1. You get 2 of the forward observer bots, 1 TRHMG, 1 missile bot, 1 flash bot, and 2 baggage bots of whatever varieties they can take. Notably, they can only take 2 UD bots, which most sectorals can take 4 of their helper bots, which is just kind of interesting. Actually, looking at the list in general, they have really low availability, which is kind of curious. Like, almost everything is 1 or 2, and then you have Cludgers and Hellblazers at 3, and Rovers at 5, and everything else is 1 or 2, which is kind of crazy. They can take a Digger, a Beast Hunter, an Authorized Bounty Hunter for all of your mercenary stuff, for people that are into that. Honestly, they'll be very useful for this sectoral, because those are all cheap options that do useful things that an otherwise fairly expensive sectoral will appreciate, even if I don't personally like the proliferation of mercenaries in this way. They can take Hippolyta, which is their only source of obfuscation tech in the faction, or in the sectoral. They don't have any smoke anywhere. She has Eclipse. They don't have any way to produce white noise. Like that, this is it. Like, if you don't want to gunfight your way out of something, or just try and cautious move or camo around something, this is what you've got. And Hippolyta's great. But yeah, it's interesting that she's kind of the option there. And then we have another new unit that we'll dig into a little bit, is Samus. Jamie Samus Arantes. So this is a really weird profile. It's really cool, but it's very strange. Right. So it is 6'4" move, which is pretty notable on... This is a Silhouette 4 model, because this is a unit with guard. So just the usual Silhouette 4 that you see with guard models. But 6'4" move is pretty notable. CC 22, which is respectable. BS 13, which is solid. Fizz and Whip 14. Armor 4, another BTS 9 unit. 2 full wounds, and has Martial Arts 1, which is fine. Courage, forward deployment 8 inches again. An extra 2-inch dodge. Guard. Shock immune. Mim 3. Decoy 1. And again, terrain total.
I like the decoy. That's a nice new kind of thing. We haven't had doesn't get used a whole lot, and don't think we've had anything on one that's not a size 2 profile yet.
Demonist.
I don't think so.
From Bakunin.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, the Demonist. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
I forgot about it, though.
Yep. It's easy to
There's
forget
no model.
Nope.
There's no model yet.
It
doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist. That's it. But yeah, so it's really interesting. Samus is not particularly good in close combat, but it's not bad. Martial Arts 1 and CC22 with a shot close combat weapon is passable in a pinch. Like, that's something you could do with guard if you really wanted to try and skew the face-to-face roll a little bit. Like, if someone's trying to shoot at you, and then you want to impose martial arts and mimetism.
ARO, I could see it being
Yeah.
more useful.
Right.
But in active, you have a plasma rifle.
Exactly. Yeah, so you can either be a 49-point NCO or 49-point Lieutenant +1 order. And they both variants come with a plasma rifle, not a carbine, but a full-on plasma rifle, which I believe is a first for any non-combined army unit. I mean, things like Samza, I'm considering a combined army unit for that purpose, even though they're a mercenary. But this is like a human unit that has a plasma rifle. Oh no, I guess Hector has a plasma rifle.
Yeah, Hector's got a full rifle.
That's right. I'm thinking of the Lynx as a carbine.
Yes.
So never mind. Hector's had a full rifle for a while, so ignore me. But the Acrylac cannon and nanopulsar are nice to have. It's a really interesting unit. Decoy, notably without camouflage, so you're actually using decoy markers, which doesn't happen very often. I feel like almost everything with decoy has camo, which of course is not the case, but it feels like that's common.
Yeah, Helix is decoy or camo.
Right, yeah. But it's an interesting way to keep from being hacked and to kind of give yourself a little bit of leeway first turn if you're going second, to make it so that they're hard to pick off. Also, it's a close-ish range gunfighter. Like BS-13 MIM-3 is a good place to start. Plasma rifles are just always good. And there's such because they can take ment agents and have 15-point chain of command, it's really tempting to take the extra lieutenant order Samus when there's a good amount of NCO in the faction. Yeah, having a forward deploying large base, moderately good CC plasma rifle guard unit up the board. It's just such a weird profile, but really interesting.
It feels very initiative dependent. If you're going first or second, how far you go up on this. That's
That's why you have guard and decoy.
True.
Those will help. Yeah, I think this is the fate of a lot of size 4. I mean, there aren't a lot of to begin with, but I think this is the fate of like Andromeda and to a lesser extent Colonel Vronin, because the alpha is not an attack piece. It's just not. But the others, it's just so table dependent. Being able to move around effectively, having places you can safely deploy, being able to apply your range effectively, those are all tricky. But Samus is fast, which helps. Decoy, again, makes it so you're a little bit less susceptible to that first turn attack. At least it will make the attack a little less effective. Somebody is going to have to put some effort into digging them out, hopefully. But yeah, I think that Samus is really interesting. It's a cool profile. Certainly not something you'll see all the time, but you're definitely going to see it some, because it's just such a unique profile. It feels like it just has a combination of things that I feel like we haven't really seen anywhere else, really. Then we have Sonia. Sonia Lacroix. I've heard pronounced Lacroix. That's what I thought it was. I heard it LaCroix as well, but I think that is an Americanized pronunciation, perhaps. So, so Sonia is their dire foe for Torchlight, and she's got a pretty interesting profile as well. So 6'2" move is great. CC 21 with Martial Arts 1 is passable in a circumstance where you really, need to get stuck in, I guess, but not your first resort. BS 12, Fizz 13, which is kind of surprising. Whip 13, Arm 2, BTS 6, 1 wound. She's got Albedo, which is nice when it comes up, but only comes up every so often. Martial Arts 1, as we mentioned. Courage, Shock Immune, Stealth, Terrain Total again, and X-Visor. Which X-Visor is always nice when it comes up, so that's a cool add-on. And she packs a multi-rifle, Emerat, and multi-pistol, and a shot close combat weapon, which is respectable. And then she can either be a specialist for 27 points, an NCO for 28, and not a specialist, or a lieutenant and specialist operative at 28 points that refunds you an SWC, which is pretty cool because we don't see this very often.
Yeah, there's only a handful.
But yeah,
and some of them are not Joan.
And some of them are not Joan. It's true. But yeah, so it's interesting that she gets to keep Spec Op. Because a lot of times you lose that on lieutenant profiles. Not always, but I would not have been surprised to see that. And then Sonia is a wild card and also has the Silver Star tag for composition purposes. So I think being able to throw in Sonia as another member of a Silver Star team could be interesting, bringing NCO with it. She's not any cheaper than the Rovers, but even though she's less durable, but it's got some interesting equipment. Like Emerats are pretty nasty when it comes up. Hitting somebody with the multi-pistol instead of her shot close combat weapon will probably be the way to go. If she needs to get into CC, which she can do okay. But yeah, I think that it's always surprising to see how far you can get away with a rifle shot when you have an X-Visor.
Yeah.
Like going to zero range from 16 to 32 surprises people.
Oh yeah. I'm looking at her and I'm just like, man, I want to take her as a lieutenant. And then I want to take all the mine layers and only pay SWC for 2 of the 4 of them.
Right.
Effectively.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really tempting with that Ment agent.
Yeah.
As the lieutenant. It's not that expensive, I guess, for 2 orders.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, the Ment agent really makes some of these viable that I think would have a really hard time otherwise. Like, Sonia is very fragile, and Samus is going to want to be in the thick of things. But having a 15-point chain of command unit does wonders for making those sorts of things a lot less risky. So speaking of which, we had to round out the sectoral are the reinforcements, which they get 1 of each. So they can take a Jackboot, a Vidocq, and a Nightshade. Oh, and a Ment, of course, if I didn't already say that. The Ment, I think you will see pretty frequently because it's really, really cheap. 15 points for chain of command is, it's a backup specialist. It lets you run one of these fun lieutenants that would, you would otherwise take pause in running, and has 3 heavy riot stoppers, which is great. You could also take a hacker version, I suppose, which is kind of interesting. The Jackboots, I don't really see what they do here as a one-off. I feel like they would be interesting line troops for another sectorial or something, but I don't think they really do a lot here. It does give you another wild card option of a paramedic or engineer, which is kind of interesting. So
I think
that's
for the
something.
mobility teams, I have that Spitfire as like the high burst point option, but that's kind of where I'm seeing the Jackboots fitting into my list.
Yeah, I could see that. The Vidocq is kind of interesting because there's no snipers in this list other than if you decide to take your Kappa as a multi-sniper. So that's kind of interesting. And they're MSV1 Mimetism 3, I believe. So that's kind of something.
Yes.
Now, it is the FTO options, which I don't know exactly what those will look like, I suppose. If we look at Starmada as a template, which again is not necessarily going to be the case. Oh, actually, yeah. So there is no FTO option in Starmada. They can just all join fire teams, either the shotgun, Doctor Shotgun, or Sniper MSV1. So I'm interested to see what actually counts as FTO and if they're making any new profiles for the Vidoc. I don't expect that to be the case, but that could be. But yeah, I think either the Doctor or the Sniper could be interesting in one of these teams, and another source of NCO, which is notable. And then a little more midfield with a Nightshade, in case you didn't have enough out there. You can take a Nightshade, another forward deployment 8 inches unit, which is interesting. For all the stuff they can have in the midfield, there is not a single infiltrator, I don't think. It's all forward deployment plus 8 inches.
I believe you're correct.
So just kind of interesting that you don't have the option to, one, go to the full halfway line, and two, if you wanted to, you couldn't push past, which is kind of interesting. I mean, most of these
That's what the
units
drop
aren't
trooper's
high-fizzing.
for.
That's what the drop trooper's for. Yes. With your Fizz 12. Your Fizz 12 drop trooper.
Every time, all the time.
That's right. 60% of the time, it works every time. So that is kind of the gamut of all of the new units that exist here. And let's we kind of talked about the fire teams a little bit as we went along, but just to make those a little bit more clear, there's a Silver Star fire team which needs a rover or Hellblazer to form it. And then these can be any type of fire team. These can be Core, Harris, or Duo. And then you can add Wave Riders. And then notably, Hippolyta and Sonia also count as Silver Star. So Wave Riders, Hellblazers, Silver Star Rovers, and those two all count for composition bonuses. You can take up to 2 Silver Star Primes in it, which do not count as Silver Stars, which is poor naming convention, but good game balance decision.
Agreed.
A silver star does not count as a silver star.
No.
go.
Yours is a fake Silver Star. We just call you Prime.
Optimus Prime.
I am Optimus Prime. No, we're not gonna do that. Anyway, you can take Raveneye. You can take a Raveneye, which is great. Raveneye is a specialist with an Emerat and submachine gun, always cool. You can throw your Kappa in here if you want. Not bad. You have the Cludger teams they are Cludger teams, but the mobility fire teams are based around a Cludger, which have the mobility tag, which is also shared by Hippolyta and Sonia, or just Hippolyta, not Sonia. My mistake. So Hippolyta gets mobility in case you need better discovers for your team. If you only take Cludgers and her, you get +3 discover. Yeah. And then you can take the Nimrod FTO option, which is that AP marksman rifle. And then the Wrecker duo, which you need a Wrecker and then something else. Probably not another Wrecker. The
Why
wild
not?
card,
They're only 51 points. Let's go.
It could be, but wouldn't you rather have them on different sides of the board in 2 duos?
Yes, I would.
So the wild cards here are, of course, the Cludgers, which are great. Psychops, Stormbots, a Jackboot, a Vidoc, FTO, whatever that looks like. Which there's also a chance that the FTO is it could just be a stand-in and it doesn't actually have any meaning and it'll just be Vidocs like in Starmada. Who knows? Hippolyta, Sonia, and a Ment agent. So I could totally see, you could throw a Ment agent and you could do like a Ment agent and a Vidoc sniper maybe, and a Hellblazer and a defensive heroes or something. I don't know. The idea sounded better before I said it. Oh no, the Stormbot. Stormbot would be cool for something like that. With that extra damage, heavy rocket launcher and stuff. So there's actually a fair number of wild cards. There's a good chunk of things you can kind of mix and match, which I think are interesting. I don't know. Anything that stands out to you guys about the fire team chart?
Just they seem that it's very limited. And what I mean by that is it's like there are 3 types of fire teams.
Sure.
And it's fine, but the Silver Star fire teams are, obviously very flexible and can form all of the varieties. So I don't feel it's really going to be an issue, but I do like that it is a bit more limited, just because a lot of other sectorials end up just having like kind of a free for all with their fire teams, even though they're supposed to theoretically be kind of a limiting factor, but they don't really operate that way. More rats.
Yeah.
Like this is like
Yeah.
the Silver Star team. It feels very Morat-ish, but with not everything carrying the same keywords, and then not getting the extra bonuses. Which, although I am sad that we have not seen more fire team specific bonuses other than the Tarlock teams, because I was like, oh, this is a really cool idea, and then we haven't seen it again. That's a different topic, though. But yeah, I do like that they feel a little bit more limited in their fire team options.
Feels like a good game balance thing.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that this will be a fairly strong faction with some interesting tools, and it's got a couple varieties to play, which is my favorite thing about them, I think, is that you could play very kind of skirmisher-esque, midfield heavy. You could play with a pretty strong info war game. Like, you don't have top-of-the-line hackers for that, but you can bring a decent amount of them. You can also do, you can do your heavy infantry pain trains just fine. They've got an interesting tag that can do stuff. Like, I feel like they've got a good chunk of ways to play. Like, you could play with a ton of remotes, really. Like, they have a lot of interesting remotes. Yeah, they've just got a good variety of things without feeling like they have everything. And there's some serious choices to make when you're list building with them. Like, I was kind of playing around a little bit just to see, like, obviously they're not an army at the time of recording, but I was kind of playing around with points to see what you can do with them, and you definitely have to make some sacrifices to get things in there.
I like the feeling of making those sacrifices, though. I feel like we see a lot more armies that are, obvious choices, or, I like having to pick and choose. I do miss those days of just, finding your role and sticking with it. So,
yeah, absolutely. Like, I know I've mentioned this like on the Discord and things like that, but I really like Tunguska for that reason. Like, they feel like they've got tons of cool stuff, but you can never fit everything you want. And I think that's a really good spot to be in a sectorial for balance reasons. I think that's kind of the happy place. It's like, oh, I can almost make what would be the perfect list, but not quite. But yeah, we're in just a moment. We'll transfer over and kind of give our final thoughts on our first impressions of Torchlight Brigade. But we want to give a quick thank you to our patrons for supporting the show. So thank you very, very much for your continued support there. We really appreciate that. It helps us subsidize costs for equipment and software subscriptions and various things like that. We don't pay ourselves with it or anything along those lines. It all goes back into the show to hopefully make better content that you all enjoy. And you also get some benefits in return as a show of our thanks. You can get early access to episodes, or you can listen to them a week early. There's also some spots on our Discord that are patron specific. And our Discord itself is free and open. It's a community Discord that anyone can pop in for that. And we'd love to have you there if you haven't already joined. It's a good place to talk shop for more Infinity if you don't have enough as it stands. We can talk about if you have ideas on episodes or feedback on something that we've talked about, or desperately need to correct something that we said, or show off painted models, or whatever the case may be. We'd love to have you there for that as well. And with that said, Ian, Trevor, what are your kind of final but initial thoughts on Torchlight Brigade? Ian.
Yeah, I think that they're interesting overall. I like the design direction. They feel like they kind of fit a certain niche that a lot of other factions don't really hit. And it's like they go heavy into the heavy infantry thing, like Invincible Army or Military Orders, but they have a lot of limits in there, like not having any infiltration or not having any smoke or things like that. So it feels like there's been some very deliberate design decisions to give them kind of their own identity, which I do like. So I'm excited to see how they shake out on the table when everybody gets hands on models. And yeah, I think they're going to be very interesting and fun to play with and against.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Trevor?
I agree with Ian on that. They feel like they're kind of fit in that niche of really good heavy infantry, good specialists. That's the biggest thing that jumped out to me. But there's some obvious weaknesses. To me, there's a lot of short range weapons like boarding shotguns and SMGs. So you kind of have to close that gap, which kind of feels nice little challenge. They don't have everything. But I'm really
I didn't
excited
notice any like sniper rifles or long range stuff on the new profiles. It's all if they have those, it's going to be on like the stuff they're taking from vanilla or the other stuff. Like they do seem to have some limits there.
Yeah, just heavy machine guns and rocket launchers.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting to me just from a game balance thing. I know I'm excited about the BS attack -3 on that Silver Star Prime.
Yep.
I appreciate that they didn't make it as of right now. This might change. It doesn't count as coherency for that Silver Star Prime, or the Silver Star link
Fireteams. So,
yeah,
which is for the best. I don't think it needs to.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be BS 17 before range and cover.
And for the shooting at you.
Yeah, I was gonna say for the first sectorial in 4 years, I guess.
Sounds about right.
Since Cosmo, this feels pretty healthy from a game balance standpoint.
Yeah, I would agree. I feel like there's very clear holes in the faction, notably no obfuscation gear. Like they have no smoke, no white noise, one 40-point eclipse thrower, and that's it. They have to brute force their way through things, but they also don't have very many things that are, premium gunfighters. They have a lot of solid gunfighters, but the Prime strikes me as kind of a premium gunfighter at BS 14 and then with the MSV1 and BS TAC -3. But otherwise, there's a decent amount of BS 13. But BS 13, is good, but it's not, this is not the apex predator of shooting engagements.
Yeah, the record was a little surprising being at 13 because the only other tags that are really sitting at a 13 is things like the Anaconda.
And geckos and...
Yeah, but it's all like the kind of real super budget tier, lower grade stuff. So it's kind of was a little surprising, but I like it.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good thing. Yeah, they are weak to hacking in a fashion. They do have a little bit of firewall protection. They do have some decent hackers, but I think a strong InfoWar game will cause them problems. And so, yeah, but then they come back with a fair amount of resiliency. Like there's a lot of heavy infantry, some good remotes to play around with that you can pick back up relatively easily. And you can fit a good chunk of orders, like not as easily as maybe Invincible Army as an example, but they've got a good chunk of TACware that they can bring to the table. They've got several NCO units. They do have a Lieutenant +1 order model, even though Samus is pretty expensive. But yeah, it's an interesting, pretty balanced feeling list overall. There are some profiles that look quite potent, but in the context of the whole sectorial, it doesn't strike me as something that's going to be, oppressively powerful by any stretch. But yeah, well, it was fun taking a look at a new sectorial. As I said, it's something we've not had for a long time, but I appreciate you sitting down and listening to this with us, and I hope to hear your thoughts as well, in our Discord or on our posts and whatnot. But we'll call it there, and we appreciate your time and listening. I've been Devin.
Ian.
I'm sure. That's the meta.